Hey, welcome to this week's History Brief. So today we're going to talk about, this is a part one of at least two, maybe three, we'll have to see how it goes, series on the history of ROTC at IU. So quick language piece here. The military science is the larger academic discipline of which the Federal Reserve Officer Training Corps program resides. So a lot of people use the terms military science or ROTC interchangeably, or they sometimes think there's a difference between them, and there is a difference. Military science, the Department of Military Science, is a academic unit, as is the Department of Aerospace Studies, which is the Air Force ROTC. ROTC is the federal program. So today we're going to talk about the pre-ROTC period. So all the way up through 1916, that first period. What is it that was different? What was military science like at IU before the coming of the ROTC program? So in 1840, Indiana University became the first university in the country that was not a military academy to have a full-time professor of military science on staff. And I say that like a little asterisk after it because I have yet to find, even though I've tried and tried to find anyone who had one besides us. There were a few that had a visiting professor or that had somebody they hired to teach military science but wasn't a regular part of the faculty. Well, how did we end up with that? Well, in 1840, we hired Jacob Almond, a former Army officer and West Point alum, to be our professor of mathematics. And we asked him if he would also be the professor of military science and start off our program while he was here. And he was here from 1840 to 1843 and oversaw that program and then left due to budget cuts that happened. And the program faded out after that because we didn't have another faculty ranked person that could be the professor of military science. Jacob Almond's legacy lives on today. You may know the ROTC canon is named Jake, and that is who that it's named for. During the Civil War, there was an effort made to restart the military science program. A group known as the University Cadets was formed and drilled, and even though campus was located at Seminary Square, they actually drilled in Dunn's Woods, which would later be our current campus location, or the core of our current campus location. And those cadets, it's not real clear who was their instructor. It may have been local veterans of the Mexican-American War. It may have been local militia members. They were definitely a part of the local militia. At that point, militia service was still pretty obligatory for all able-bodied men within the community. And so it's not real clear how that worked or functioned, but it did exist as an organization. They even had their own uniforms. During the Civil War, the Morrill Land-Grant Act was passed, which created land-grant universities, places like Purdue and Mississippi State and Auburn, and gave money to institutions and required that they teach military science along with agricultural and mechanical work. So after the war, the Army had to provide instructors for all of those, and they said we can't afford to also provide instructors to other schools. Except there's 10. We'll provide instructors to 10 schools. And IU was one of the 10 schools that was selected outside of the land-grant institutions to provide instructors to. And so our first instructor after that was Major General Eli Long, who was the senior most ranking instructor out of all of the military science instructors that were sent out across the country. He was only here for a year before he got called back by the Army for other duties, and at which point he was replaced by Lieutenant Colonel James Thompson, who at that point was the senior ranking military science instructor in the Army. And so Lieutenant Colonel Thompson, who actually came here as a captain and then continued to get promoted, and as a captain was also the senior ranking instructor and continued that. He actually stayed all the way through the 1870s and retired from the Army while here, and then continued to stay on teaching math here at IU even after he retired from the Army. His son would also briefly attend here before going to West Point. His son, John Thompson, is Brigadier General John T. Thompson, most famous for having invented the Thompson submachine gun. So another little connection back to the program. By the late 1870s, interest in military science as an elective started to fade for a whole number of reasons that I won't go into, but students just sort of stopped signing up for it, and so the program went away. And it wasn't until the 19-teens, around the time of the Mexican border war, that interest or calls for military science came back on campus again. During the Mexican border war, we had a large group of students that formed up their own company, Company I, and joined en masse to the Indiana National Guard and went and served on the Mexican border during that. And when they came back, they said, hey, you know, nationally, they're talking about creating this program to train reserve officers on college campuses. We'd really love to have one of those programs or be a part of that. What can IU do to be involved? And before the Army created campus programs, they started with just summer camps for people that might be interested in getting a reserve officer commission. And that was so wildly popular with the students that even the president of the university, William Lowe Bryan, who was in his 50s, asked if he could go to ROTC summer camp and get a reserve officer commission. He ended up not going and was not allowed to for a number of reasons, you can imagine, but it shows you how popular the program was that even the president wanted to be involved in it. And when I say a reserve officer commission, to be clear, that doesn't mean they actually had any obligation to service in the National Guard, reserves, or active duty. It basically meant that if you were drafted, you would be drafted as an officer. That's really all it was more like individual ready reserve as we know it today. All right, so now I got you up to World War I, roughly the first 100 years of IU history with military science, and really about 80 years of military science history. Our next video, we will take on World War I through the 60s and kind of what happens there and what does that mean. And then after that, we'll go from the 60s on, and you'll see why that kind of works out. So to catch the rest of the videos, make sure you subscribe, hit the subscribe button, and we'll also throw up another video if you want to go back and watch some of the previous ones. We'll see you next week.